maybe in Japan. So, talking about deadwood, I will say, ask questions. If I forget something you have questions about, just let me know. I made an outline, but I forgot it in rushing today, as typical. So I'm just going to try to wing it here and cover some. I'm not going to cover everything, of course, to do with deadwood. I'm going to cover some basics. I'm not going to do too much in like carving and things like that. That's a whole topic unto itself, and not one that I'm probably have the most expertise in. But just kind of going with deadwood. First question is, why deadwood? What trees use deadwood? What is deadwood aesthetically bringing to the table? Anyone? Why?
A story, like a lightning strike, possibly?
Yeah.
Age.
Yeah, age. Story. Both of those things. Those are probably the two most important things. Yep. And then when you're talking about things like junipers especially, you're getting a lot of, it's super important for the contrast between live and dead there as well too. So age, nothing shows age quite as in your face as deadwood does. So it's a great way to show age, it's a great way to tell a story. So whether it's a tree that was struck by lightning and the top of it's all dead, you have the top jin, you can tell that story by something like that. If it's a juniper where the vast majority of it is dead and died off, and you just have this one little sprig over here, okay, that one was growing for hundreds of years, that died off, but it still had enough energy to throw out this other sprig, and it's kind of continuing to strive and trying to survive against all odds. So with that, one of the things as we talk about things is trying to keep in mind the story and tell that consistently with how you're doing the deadwood as well too. So in my outline I had some different things as far as what not to do, but hopefully I'll get to that and not forget too many of those things. Trees. Which trees? Not all trees are typically shown with deadwood, not all species. So what are your typical species that you see with deadwood? What's that?
Maybe juniper.
Any juniper? Juniper is probably number one and first and foremost. Deadwood is taking the center stage more than anything else with junipers.
Buttonwood, tropical.
Buttonwood, that's a good one, and that was going to come to my next thing. Most everyone thinks of conifers, which is all I have to bring here today, that show that off, but that's not always the case. There are some deciduous trees that that are typically shown and highlight deadwood features as well too. Those are fewer than with your conifers. Your conifers are generally, because of resin content and things like that, going to be the ones that in nature show more deadwood, and thus we mimic that with our bonsai as well too. Where most deciduous trees, especially by convention, let's say your maples, if you go to Japan and you're looking at maples, you're not going to see any with deadwood on it. Not in good shows. Not that you can't, but if you're trying to tell a consistent story, maple trees, if you're trying to show age, which is generally a big part of what we do in bonsai, what happens after you have a part die and you have deadwood in a maple tree? It's not going to take very long for it to rot out. And then you're not going to have much deadwood. So you don't have old deadwood in those trees. So most of the time in Japan, conventionally, you're not going to see that in your typical deciduous trees. There are exceptions like ume, flowering apricot, that will display really cool craggly bark next to deadwood, and almost all of those have really good examples of deadwood mixed in there with the tree. Buttonwood is another one that's
Olive.
yeah, olive's another one. So you do have these deciduous trees or broadleaf evergreens that will show deadwood as well too. The deadwood on those are typically going to look a little bit different than some of what we're going to talk about, but I'll mainly talk about pines and junipers because that's the majority of what we're going to what you're going to see it. There's going to be other spruces and other conifers as well too, but there's less examples of those here in St. Louis, of some of those things like mountain hemlock or larch or some of these things that, well, we won't find many of them in the club to show good examples of them anyways. So, starting to talk about deadwood, right now is a good time to start to work on deadwood, improve it, bring it the next step. So usually late spring into summer is a really good time to work on your deadwood. So, and I say work on it or bring it the next step because sometimes with gin you might be taking a whole portion of it and cutting that back and make 90% of it right there. But if you're doing shari, and just to clarify those two things, gin is deadwood that's out at the end of a branch or at the top of the trunk, but it's kind of on its own at the end of the terminal end of the shoot, whatever it is, trunk or branch. And shari is along the trunk along with the live tissue there. So I'll use both those terms, but you're going to often kind of create them a little bit differently. When you're doing shari on the trunk, that is something that you'll often do in increments, especially in junipers as well too. So if you have do you want to have some of the other smaller junipers? So the ones that you brought those two, was there a fourth one as well too?
There.
Oh, it was those four. Yep. So for instance, this one may be a little bit easier to see than some of the others. I just worked on this one last night. This area where I kind of carved away is going to be kind of the new deadwood feature on that. That was on there already the year before, but not nearly as wide. So especially with junipers, you're going to kind of incrementally go at it, make a pretty narrow area of deadwood on the trunk for shari at first, and then you're going to widen that out kind of each year until you get to the right proportion of deadwood to live vein. This one, if you guys want to come up and see it a little bit later, I have areas where you can tell it's more new deadwood. That's kind of the light brown there. And then I left a little area right here of where it's all kind of bleached out and it's grayed. That's the area there before, and you can see like I stopped short right there and I widened it out. So I made it about twice as wide as what it was the year before. The reason you do that, and you'll do that both on pines sometimes, but even more so on junipers, is that if you take too much off, you might kill off part of the roots of the tree that you're not wanting to do, that you're not wanting to kill off. So junipers, they have, when they transport energy through the living tissue, we refer to it as kind of the vein of tissue because they have a lot of vertical transport. So if you look at the way that the tissue grows and how that one right here kind of snakes around like that, that is because as you peel away the bark, you see that the tissue will kind of peel away and stay or make kind of a path there that's the natural, follow the natural grain. That's what I'm trying to say. So it will have a grain, and the transport of nutrients will follow that grain. And especially in older juniper trees, you don't have what we call a lot of lateral transport. So if, let's say this branch right here, if you can see that, that was a branch that broke off, or I cut it off. And from there, if you kill this part right here, then all of the stuff that is down from there, going down to the roots that fed it, is typically going to die. It's not going to, this area here, if there's a slice in the tree or something right here that prevents the transport, you do make a gouge in there, some kind of wound, it's not going to move the nutrients this way across the grain. It's only going to travel along the vein. So you got to really take good care to notice that. Pines, on the other hand, they have a lot more lateral transport. So they're more likely, if, let's say you have this branch right here, if right below it you wound it, there's a better chance that it will move nutrients across the grain rather than just along the grain. So you're less likely to have it die, like this branch here, die if there's a big wound down here. Now, going back to creating the deadwood. Let's say, first thing that you're going to do if you're going to create deadwood, if it's spring and you have a new juniper that you're growing up and you want to do something with, something like this, that I probably 6, 7 years old. I grew it from a little cutting, put some bends in there, and it's time to add some deadwood. And I would recommend doing that, especially on your junipers, earlier the better. So as soon as you got a decent size in the trunk, start carving in your deadwood. That way the deadwood is older. You start to get better definition between the live and the dead as well too. So with this one being 6 or 7, I'm like, okay, it's going to get bigger still, but I want to start putting in the groundwork for the deadwood features that I'm going to have on there later. With this one being young, I can be a little bit more aggressive with not necessarily following the grain. When it's a really old tree, let's say something like this, that's a much older tree, or something like this, if you try to be aggressive and you're like, I want this vein to encircle, the deadwood to encircle the trunk and start to make more like a barber pole appearance where the live vein's twisting up it. If you try to do that on an already old tree, you're much more likely to kill it or kill off major branches if the grain doesn't naturally do that. Now, if you're naturally following a grain that already does that, great. But on younger trees, you can get away with doing some of that where you start to carve some deadwood, go through the top layers and do a little bit of cross grain as well too, and the younger trees are more likely to adapt and start to move nutrients laterally, and you don't have to worry about so much about killing off the top stuff. So in this one, with it being a pretty young tree, I started down here at kind of the roots and came up and started circling it, even though the grain here is pretty straight. It's kind of going here, but I pretty much went 3/4 of the way around and then stopped there. Not too tight either, and allowing the spiral, not too tight of a spiral. And then I'm just going to stop there and allow it to kind of reorient its vascular system so that it can start to transport. And if next year that's going well, then I'll kind of keep extending it. And that's where you want to take steps in these things to either widen it or kind of get to the design that you're going for. With that, some of the things that I'll take a step back because that brings up a good point that I had higher up in my outline that I forgot, is the kind of features that you look for in deadwood. When you look at deadwood, what kind of features are you like, oh, that's really cool and interesting deadwood? What kind of things do you guys look for?
Grain.
What's that?
Grain.
Grain?
Movement.
Movement? What are some other things?
Color.
Okay, color, that's good. Other things? What other things will show age?
Texture.
Texture. Yeah, so where you were saying grain, the deep fissures in that grain, the textures of that deadwood, really, the older the deadwood is, or the more that it shows age, that's desirable. Where, let's say, just to kind of show an example, this just being gin that we did, I want to say last year, and stripped bark off of and did this. If you come up and look at it closely, there's not a lot of texture here. I mean, it's pretty smooth on the surface. You're getting a little bit of cracking, not a ton. Let's go to this one as another example. A lot more texture on what you're seeing there. That's going to show age a lot more. So that's a desirable characteristic. color is one thing which I'll talk about a little bit more as far as kind of helping to preserve and highlight that. But also movement. I think you said movement, so that kind of spiraling that I started talking about, especially in junipers. If you have deadwood interacting with the live vein and they're really kind of twisting around each other, that's very desirable as well too. So the more you can have that, not just on one side, but really kind of making really interesting movement. You have the live vein kind of going behind what you see in front, and then it kind of comes up the side, and then it drops down in front again. The more you have that, the better, because junipers, as I mentioned, are kind of the most prominent species that we use to highlight deadwood because of the interplay between live and dead. You get a really bright live vein and bright deadwood, and seeing those two next to each other just really kind of exemplifies and shows, okay, this is a tree that's struggling to stay alive. These parts died off, but this is, live vein is still showing life, and this, you can see that struggle of things dying off, damage to the tree. It just tells that story so much more dramatically than any other species. I'm going to turn this one around. This one has some of that. If you see, so here being the live vein on this juniper, this is a juniper that this is all grafted over now. So I just finished cutting off all the old foliage, but this has been grafted over the last 3 to 4 years, I think 3 years, to this Atowagawa foliage. But here looking at this, here being the deadwood, and then you have live vein on each side of that, and then it kind of coming up here. The more it twists around, the better. Now, one of the flaws that I see in the deadwood of this is it doesn't have as much spiraling and twisting as I would like. Most of the deadwood, you can pretty much follow that pretty cleanly all the way up, and it doesn't have quite as much spiraling as I would like. But again, you see the kind of bright white of the deadwood, and then when this is oiled up, it's going to look a lot more red. You see that live vein, and that contrast there is very important to kind of tell that story.
When you determine where you want to put the deadwood on here, do you remove, if there's foliage here, you remove the foliage before that you start doing it? Because if you take it off there, how do you know what is going to die off?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. When I dive back in, I kind of started going into what you're going to do to create deadwood. I'm going to kind of dive back into that. Where I was starting to talk about this one, first thing you're going to do is, like on a juniper or a pine, is clean it up. So that means cleaning up the foliage, getting rid of, like junipers, you're going to pluck out all the older middle stuff so that you can get down in there, see what you're doing better. You're also going to clean up the bark on junipers. So junipers, the flaky bark that develops, you're going to brush that off. You're going to start to peel it back to the kind of thinner layer of bark there, so you can see what you're doing. That does a couple things. When you are looking at the bark there in that situation, once you clean, at first you have no idea where the live vein, how the grain of the wood is going until you really clean it up. And then you can start to tell where that grain is. And that will help determine how you plan for your deadwood. So for instance, cleaning this one up, I could tell that the grain wasn't doing much twisting. It just stays right in front here. It doesn't kind of twist around. So that's kind of a downside to it. In the case of this one, I decided there was a dead piece right here. So a lot of times if you have a dead branch, a jin feature, you're going to start at that, wherever it is on the trunk or at the tip of the branch, and you're going to work backwards and then down to the root. And that's a good way to go for a lot of things. If you have a dead feature, branch or otherwise, you're often going to start there and start to peel back and work your way down. The other way is if you don't have anything specific like that, or you really want to try to, let's say, what you think is going to really highlight this tree and make it look better is, instead of worrying about it connecting up here, you really want this, there's a certain part of the base of the tree where you really want deadwood to be. it's just gonna look really cool going into the soil at that spot. Then you might start there and work your way up instead. But you're typically gonna have to find that starting point depending on what your goal is and work from there. I will look and plan it very carefully too before I start to strip any of the bark off and do the deadwood. So if I look at this and I'm like, okay, I want to go from there. And if I don't look at where I'm planting it, I might start here and the vein goes back here and then it disappears and you don't see any of it. It all stays in the back. And that's where it goes naturally. So you really want to trace that from the very beginning to have an idea of where it's going to go, because that can change a lot of things. For instance, Jesse has a really cool juniper that's a huge cascade, and Tyler and him were working on it. I was there, we were looking at it and trying to decide what to do. Really wanted to kind of cut off this lower branch and make it less of a dramatic cascade, but that lower branch was that live vein that came and followed that branch, that came into the nabari of the tree, the root flare, at a point where if you remove that, it would be all deadwood on that side and you just one little live vein on the other side. And having that live vein there actually was really important to the balance of the tree. So even though that branch would have been better to take off, when you look at it and you know that I cut this branch off, I'm going to get the whole section of that to die off, and I'm going to lose that live vein on the other side. At the end it was like, no, we can't lose that, that's too important, so it would have been a mistake to cut it off. In fact, kind of just going on that thought for a second, this tree, which we did the deadwood for, I mean, it's been a progress, but we did a major progress on the deadwood where we killed off a lot of this different parts, and as we kind of cut off the foliage that was on here before to go over to the grafts, there's a mistake in this that I'm really worried about. I'm kind of curious after I'm done if one of you guys want to come up and take a look at it. If you think you know what the mistake is, let me know. I'm curious. But both me and the teacher didn't notice it right away. Maybe we had too many beers when we were working on it. But it was the next day that it hit me, and I'm like, oh man, that could really take away from the future of this tree. And in hindsight, we should have done something different. We should have grafted on another site so it maintained the live vein in different areas. So take a look at it and see if you can see what the problem is at some point. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm trying to cram all this stuff in, but probably I'll talk a little bit more about creating it, because I haven't really got to that yet. When you go to, I talked about preparing for how you want to do the deadwood. Juniper, pine, you want to look at, okay, sit down, study the tree, you have your front, where do you want that deadwood to really highlight different features? Once you have that design and you're kind of like, okay, I think I have it, I see the vein if it's a juniper, if it's a pine, I'm like, okay, right here, I think that's really going to highlight some different features of it. That's where I want to do it. So then the first step is start to cut away at the bark. When you are developing it, you want to, and I already talked about cleaning up the bark. If it's a juniper, if it's a pine, you don't do that. If it's pine, you might start where you want the deadwood. You might start kind of, if it's really thick bark, you might start to peel that away a little bit. But then you're going to kind of use either a chisel, a scalpel blade to cut through the cambial layer, so the living part on the outside, to where you get deep enough that you can start to peel away. Now, you could just go with a chisel and start to chisel it away, but it's going to leave all these tool marks. It's going to be very unnatural. You can also do it with a die grinder or a Dremel tool, but again, you're going to be left with a lot of marks. It usually does not look nearly as good as what natural deadwood is going to look like. So you can better mimic natural deadwood by kind of using blunt dissection. So in cases like this, this is a pine here, and I had already cut this off and had some here, but it's still too long and straight. So if I'm trying to create more deadwood, I had already kind of gotten a scalpel blade, got a little bit of this up, and then you're typically going to take your gin pliers and start to peel that down, and that's going to give you a much more natural look, and then kind of tear, so rip and tear rather than cut or grind. And Bjorn has a lot of really good videos on how to do that, some of which are behind paywalls, but he has a lot that also are not. So, can we grab the tool roll out there?
Yes.
Thank you. So using different tools, and I'll show you a couple things on this, where if you have, let's say you're making gin on the tips here, or on this right here, using blunt dissection, again, kind of coming in here, and instead of, let's say I could take a carving tool and sit here and do some of this and start to do it, especially when you're starting, you really want to just take big chunks and start to peel and rip more naturally, and you're gonna have a much more natural or chaotic kind of appearance to it. So I don't have gin pliers in here, but you're gonna take that and kind of rip away. Now you can do carving. There are, and if you're really trying to be artistic about it, you can do a lot of carving, and that can look really good, but it takes a lot of skill, time to do that as well too. Even the people who carve a lot, like Will Baddeley, who has come and done some different workshops here, he starts with doing it this way, doing more kind of blunt tools, trying to make it look more natural, and then from there, using some of the carving techniques to mimic as best you can. For instance, this one, all these lines were carved in there, and although this looks good, it still looks very different than a more natural tree that's been weathered for hundreds or thousands of years. So, what questions before I go on any further? I don't know. I could say it. I keep going for a long time, but I know I'm going to forget a lot of the most important stuff. What questions do you guys have so far?
Talk about exaggerating the movement if you're.
So yes, that's a good point. So as we talked about planning things out, figuring out where you want that to go, to highlight the tree, whether it's to highlight a foliar pad or to highlight movement. So a lot of times, if you have room to decide where you want the deadwood to be, having it on the inside of a curve will sometimes accentuate that curve a little bit more. Having it wrapped to the outside of a branch in certain areas will accentuate movement. So you can use it to accentuate movement. You can use it to accentuate foliar areas. You can use it to accentuate parts of the nabari or the root structure. You can do a lot with it to really help highlight the features that you want to.
Do you wire your gins, and how often do you treat them?
Great question. Yes, and I should talk about treatment. Thank you. It's one of the big things I would have just probably forgot about. So with gin and wiring, you'll see people do it different ways. You'll see people say don't bother wiring your gin once you create gin, it's never going to hold, so there's no point in wiring it. And I, somewhere in the middle, the idea is you want to put movement in your gin, so wire it and put it into position, ideally ahead of time before the branch dies. Because if you do it after the branch is dead and dry, one, it's really hard to get into place, and two, as soon as you take that wire off, it's going to want to spring back to its natural position a lot more. So you either put movement into those branches that are going to become gin like years ahead of time, get that movement already in there, then cut back and strip your bark and create your gin. Or less effectively, but still effective, is at the time that you strip the bark off, if it's still alive, so it's still very turgid tissue, it's still very wet, you put wire on it that time, wire it into place, and leave that on there for a good and long time until that has completely dried out. Better in junipers, they'll dry out faster. Pines, that really resinous sap that pines have you can kill it off and it stays kind of soft with sap in it for years afterwards, depending on how big it is as well too. So I try to if possible, put the movement in there as early as possible, get it to lock in, and then when you strip the bark, it's going to stay that way. Otherwise, you have a much better chance of it springing back and not holding the form that you want it to. As far as kind of taking care of your deadwood, very important to do that, otherwise you just get rot, right? So if you're not taking care of the deadwood's going to start to decay, rot, and not always in a controlled fashion or in the way that you want it to. So one way to kind of both aesthetically highlight the deadwood and to help minimize rot is to use lime sulfur. So you can buy it from most bonsai supply places like Jonas at Bonsai Tonight, or what's the place?
Eastern Leaf, Stone Lantern?
Yeah, Stone Lantern is the one I was thinking. You can buy it from Roll King and places like that sell it for animals. I'm a veterinarian, so I know I used to give dogs and cats lime sulfur baths. Better off, honestly, I would stick with the stuff that's made for bonsai. It's just easier, cleaner, less of a mess than trying to dilute it down or worry about some of the other things.
Does it ever go bad? Does it
No.
go up in the sealed container?
No, I've never had that problem. I've had it leak and be exposed to the air, and I think the more it is, it will start to deteriorate and lose some of its potency if you were to leave it open for a long period of time. But as long as you keep it in a closed container, it's going to be fine for years and years and years. Now that lime sulfur, it smells like sulfur. It smells terrible. So don't ever do it inside. Don't do it anywhere you're going to get yelled at. So if at all possible, do it in the backyard as far away as you can. That lime sulfur, anywhere from what it comes in a bottle, typically from the bonsai suppliers, I think it's around 30% lime sulfur is what it kind of is already diluted down to. From there, you may decide to dilute it down further. You can use it at full strength, or you can dilute it down further. Typically anywhere between full strength and like a 1 to 5 dilution with just water. And then you're gonna paint it on your deadwood. Now lime sulfur, you gotta be very careful that you don't get it on the live tissue. So you're gonna literally use a fine paintbrush and paint it on there. One tip to make sure you do before you even start that is wet the tree, wet the bark, so it really absorbs. If you just try to paint the lime sulfur onto just bone dry wood like this, it's not going to really seep in evenly, and you're more likely to get blotchiness, or it's not going to look right. So wet the bark ahead of time, maybe do it a couple times, like come spray down the bark, give it 10 minutes, and then do it again. And then do it again. If it starts to dry out as you're going, then use a spray bottle and kind of keep it moist, and that'll allow the lime sulfur to more evenly soak into all those places. But you do want to be really careful as you're painting it on that you keep it away from the roots and going into the soil, and you keep it away from the live tissue as well too, because it will damage that.
How soon do you put the lime sulfur on? As soon as you do to strip the bark off?
No, not typically. I'm going to let it dry out. So when you first strip the bark off, it's going to be kind of moist. Like if you look at these, if you actually feel that tissue, it's still a little spongy underneath. Going to give it months at least, maybe 2-3 months or so, and then come back and use the lime sulfur on that. In young trees where I'm not that worried about them just starting the deadwood creation, I'm not even going to use lime sulfur on it until it gets to be a bigger portion. So when I'm just starting the very first little lines 1 year, I'm not gonna use any lime sulfur on it. Year 2, I'm gonna widen that. Year 3, I'm gonna widen that. Maybe somewhere around that point, as it gets to be a significant portion, I'm gonna use the lime sulfur.
Does the lime sulfur keep it that white color?
Yes.
Because
And that-
otherwise it'll start turning gray after a while.
Absolutely. It will start to gray in the sun, just like any wood will when you put it out there. The lime sulfur turns it bright white. So this is one that was probably lime sulfur maybe 6 months ago. And you have some areas where it's much more bright white than something like some of these that were lime sulfur more like a year ago. Lime sulfur will kill any of the kind of mildew and algae that starts to grow in the crevices of your bark. And it will lighten it up. One of the main reasons you do different dilutions is if you use it full strength, it will often, you have to be really careful about applying it. It's much harder to get an even, consistent look. You're going to have areas that are much more blanched white than others. And if you go with and it's going to be very bright when you do a full 100% lime sulfur, 100% as it comes, which is 30%. Versus if you do like a 1 to 3 dilution, a lot of times what people do, you dilute it more and do more coats of it. Whether it's at the same time, you give it like 15, 20 minutes, look at it, come back, and if some areas are not as bleached as others, then you kind of do a little bit more of a coat on that. Or you can come back a month later and put another coat on there. You're typically going to do lime sulfur for these trees that have a lot of deadwood. You're going to want to do that before a show to really highlight those things, as Jesse alluded to there as well too. Now, you'll have people debate whether they prefer ones that are very bright white, like in your face, unnaturally white, because it does really add to that contrast between living and dead. It highlights it. It is in your face. Or ones that people who want a more natural appearance. So you'll have people debate on, depending on the tree or their personal preference, whether, I'm going to use a 1 to 5 just to give it a little bit of brightness, kill any of the algae and stuff on there, but keep it more natural look, or I'm going to go really heavy and use it full strength and make it bright white, really shine up the live vein on there on a juniper so that it's like bright red. And it's going to be in your face as far as that live and dead. And that's a lot of personal preference, I find there as well too.
So if you're diluting, so you're putting a little bit in a dish and then do the ratio.
Yeah.
And then
I
dipping your brush, and then do you save that? I just was wondering, like, if you dip your brush and then on the tree, then you're getting things from the tree into the lime sulfur, do you need to worry about that, or?
I'm going to throw it out typically.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't want a jar of lime sulfur running around and my kids knock it over and then it's a stink bomb. I think you can save it. I think the organic matter in there probably does, again, dilute its potency a little bit. But
Disease-wise, lime sulfur kills like everything.
it does. I mean, it does. It does.
Okay,
So no disease issues or
How are
anything.
you figuring, I mean, are you doing it with a dropper, or how are you getting your dilution? You're just eyeballing it?
Yeah, whether you do a dropper, I typically, again, I have access to a whole lot of syringes, so I'm going to use a syringe.
Oh, I see.
Not necessarily with a needle on it, but if I have a 5 mil syringe, I can pull up 3 mils and then mix it with 12 mils of water and put it in a little cup, and I use that. And then when I'm done, I'm going to throw it somewhere in the backyard where it's not going to cause a giant stink problem.
Some cups that come with like NyQuil or something like that.
Yeah, you don't want to mix up a big batch and not use it. You're better off to mix up a small amount. Keep your stock solution, the little bottles that you might buy, keep that concentrated in that bottle and only mix up what you need. Because you're only going to use pretty much a little bit for most trees, unless you have a tree that's, I do have a couple of these where they're really big. They're going to take a lot of lime sulfur and a lot of time to do that. Yeah, so, and I will say one thing in talking about doing the lime sulfur that I kind of neglected to say, or at least I don't think I did, is you do want to clean your deadwood first. And that's a good habit to do, even if you're not adding lime sulfur all the time, is get in there with a toothbrush, nylon brush, or like a brass brush, like you're gonna, they'll sell at different, bonsai stuff. Harbor Freight, great place to get those kind of things. And you just kind of go over it until it starts to clean more evenly, and you get rid of a lot of the dirt and debris that's in there. And that allows you to, when you go to add the lime sulfur, it's going to be much more consistent when you apply that. The look's going to be better. And then even if you're not adding lime sulfur, just do that every so often so that it minimizes, again, mildew buildup and decay. Do you have a question?
What about wood hardeners? When do you use them?
That is on my sheet that I did not bring. That is another way that you can go about trying to preserve deadwood. I'm not a big fan of it. I have tried it and I've used it. If you have something that's really delicate, the wood hardener will get into the fibers and actually make it more dense and not likely to break. But in my opinion, it always, whether the two most common ones people use is the Minwax wood hardener or the PC Petrifier, thank you. Both of them add a kind of plasticky appearance to it, in my opinion.
If you water down the PC petrifier a bit, you get rid of that shininess.
Yeah, so you can do things to make it less. You can kind of rough it up afterwards with some sandpaper and things like that, but then you're kind of...
Do you use both, like the wood hardener and the lime sulfur?
You're going to want to do, once the wood hardener is in there, maybe you get a little bit of the lime sulfur may soak into a little bit of the top layers after the wood hardener breaks up, but typically you're locking in that color now that you put that wood hardener on. That's going to be the color for now. So if it's patchy and looks like different colors and then you put that wood hardener on there, it's going to forever be patchy and goofy because it's basically like...
It just seals the wood off.
Yeah, it makes it inert. It makes it to where it does not absorb anything. It's almost like impregnating it with epoxy almost. Like
And depending on the species, it can kill the tree too.
Yeah, that you have to be really careful with that as well too. So I have done it. I don't prefer it myself. I mean, there are maybe certain things where you really want to try to preserve a feature of that tree and you want to use it. Maybe like again, you have a species like a maple where you are really you want a piece of deadwood feature on there, but in 10 years that's going to be gone if you don't, like lime sulfur isn't going to do enough to preserve that. It's still going to decay pretty rapidly, so maybe you use wood hardener on that to try to really stop that decay.
I have a pomegranate that I had to use wood hardener.
Yeah.
Because the lime sulfur it wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
It was still breaking down pretty quickly.
Yeah, so with the softer wood species, you can do something like that to really, that will slow down dramatically, if not just stop the decay process. So and that's one of the reasons, again, why we don't typically use those softer wood species for a lot of that. Pomegranate, you do see a lot of deadwood on, and people use it, but it's hard to keep that the way you want it without it continually decaying. That is something you have to fight. Will you grab those two trees? I know we're getting late and I'm just kind of rambling to try to get in different points. I'd rather at this point just answer any questions than continue to ramble. So what is important to you guys? What do you guys want to know about either creating, what you're going for, anything else?
Well, it has to be quick, because I think we have to get this.
Yeah,
meeting
I know,
at some
I know.
point.
Can you
It's getting late.
your handout on the Discord or something?
Well, it's really just a very bare outline for extemporaneous speaking, so I don't forget big things, because you see I'm jumping around a lot, and it's because I don't have that in front of me, and I know myself I need that. So, any other questions?
Not for looks, but just for preservation, how often do you use lime sulfur? Every year or every other?
How often do I, or how often should you? Very different questions. I would say ideally you do it every year, sometimes multiple times a year if you're doing a more dilute. cleaning it up at least once a year would be great. There are different ways to clean it. I never got into that. It's a whole nother thing. I did talk a little bit about brushing, but you can also use the Bonsai ray gun where you get in there and it's like a little handheld power washer that you can use to clean when I have a tree with a lot of deadwood on it. It can be very handy. But I would say typically you want to be cleaning up that deadwood at least once a year, if not multiple times. You want to lime sulfur it once a year or so. I don't usually get to that. I have a lot of collected trees with lots of deadwood on it. I am lucky if I get to clean it once a year, every other year. I am lucky if I get to lime sulfur it. I don't know. Kind of. I have a lot of things. It takes a lot of time, and I'm not as good about it as I should be. Yeah, I try to. Certainly, probably the time that I end up really putting emphasis into that and doing it right is when I'm getting ready to show a tree. And I want to make sure it's cleaned up, it's lime sulfur, it looks really good. I was going to show a couple different things when we're done, and if you guys want to come up here and look at it afterwards. I have some collected pines here that have deadwood on them. You get this is like alligator scale. You get some of these really deep fissures in here. This one has the spiraling grain, and it's really showed off here in that because this, although it's a small tree, I collected it up in South Dakota, and it's still very old. I don't, let's say 50, 100. I don't know. Probably closer to 100, give or take. So you have a lot of really good features. It's good to study what natural deadwood looks like on different species, and that's why I brought these in so you can kind of look at that. This one has really good deadwood. It's not very clean compared to that one. That one I cleaned up at some point. This one needs some more. But right here at the base, this is really cool here, and then these patches of deadwood up here. Didn't get a chance to go into this. I could have. A lot of times study the placement of deadwood on natural trees too. You're not going to get deadwood typically on the underside. It's going to be where it's weathered, where stuff falls on it, where the wind is battering it. So it's going to be on what's facing up, what's facing a certain way. You're typically going to have most of your deadwood on one side or the other for a lot of these species because that's where the primary direction of the wind, the things are falling on it from other trees, all where the deer keeps rubbing on it, you're going to see more of directionality of that. So studying deadwood on naturally occurring things gives you kind of a good head start on what you're trying to make it look like. I'm going to stop.
Okay. I highly encourage everyone to come up and look at it after the meeting. As always, we got a raffle in the back. Thank you all for coming and staying.